Hello and welcome to the first episode of
Make That Feature.
In this series of videos, I want to take a look at some of the features from my favourite games and see if we can build them in Unity. This week we're going to stay with VR and we're going to have a look at the grab interaction from the game Transference. Transference is an awesome horror game that involves you solving puzzles and unravelling the mystery hiding in this mind-bending psychological thriller. I would definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't already. I've played this game in VR and it's very atmospheric and very creepy. But the specific mechanic we're going to take a look at creating in Unity this week is the grab mechanic, by which when you pick up an interactable object, such as a VHS tape or a piece of paper, you get a little notification pop up just saying what that object is that you've grabbed. This then tracks the controller and stays in its position above the object even when you rotate around. So let's dive into Unity and see how we can put this together. So the first thing I want to do is just quickly show you around this environment. This is built in Unity 2020.3 and all I've done is I've imported the XR interaction toolkit using the package manager and as well as the XR plugin management package, and then I've just marked it as Oculus for Windows and also Oculus for Android as well for the Quest. And what I've done then is gone through the basics of setting up an XR rig with a couple of direct interactors on there so I can pick things up, and a green cube on a table which has the XR grab interactable. And it's, as I'll show you, we'll just dive into VR very quickly. You can see here, this is just my temporary hand, this is a cube. I can reach up, pick up my cube, and that's about it. So nothing special going on at all. But what we want to add is the functionality of when we pick this up, knows it's been grabbed, it's going to create a canvas just above the object with a description and maybe a title as well on what the object is. There's a couple of ways we can go about this. So we can leverage the power of the XR grab interactable and hook up to these events, creating a script where every time we've selected it, which has grabbed it, it calls a method in a script and then links it up to the grab interactable that way. Or what we can do is actually inherit from the XR grab interactable script and customize it a little bit to enable the functionality. And then we can hook directly into these methods without having to physically wire every single interactable object up each time. So let's get started and create our own version of the XR grab interactable script. Cool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually get rid of our XR grab interactable script on our object. We don't need this anymore. We're going to make our own better one. So we're going to go to remove component. Now you won't actually be able to grab this object in the scene. But let's create a script folder for a second. Double click, open it up and create a new C# script, and we'll call it XR grab with pop-up. And it'll just compile for a second. And then we can go ahead and just drop this on our cube, which in my case is called the grab object. And you can see here we have the new script XR grab with pop-up. Let's go ahead, double click this and open it up in Visual Studio. So this tutorial is going to leverage the power of inheritance. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that concept in C#, you can think of inheritance as in when you create a class, you can actually create it in the image of another class, which will share all its member variables and methods. But one cool thing is that with this new class that you create, you're able to define its own unique data. And you're actually already using inheritance when you create your default scripts in Unity, because you are actually already inheriting from mono behavior, which is where we're able to get the start and the update methods. And one good analogy that I heard once was that if you take a can of soda, or you go into a supermarket and open the soda fridge, there's tons of sodas in the cabinet, but they all have the same basic properties. They all kind of contain like sugar, caffeine, but they all kind of have their own different branding or packaging that sets them apart. But when you look at them both side by side, it's obvious that they're both cans of soda. That's one analogy. I don't know if that helps make sense of inheritance or not. So this script's already inheriting from mono behavior. We actually want to inherit from the XR grab interactable. So we're going to need to add in a using namespace here. We're going to say using Unity Engine .xr.interaction.toolkit. And what we can do here, where we've got mono behavior, this is going to throw an error in a second, but I just want to show you something. I'm going to put in a comma, and we're going to want to inherit from the XR grab interactable. Now this has got a squiggly line, and it's going to tell us that we cannot have multiple base classes for mono behavior and XR grab interactable. This is because the XR grab interactable is also inheriting from mono behavior, so by extension, even if we remove the mono behavior and it looks like we're not inheriting from it anymore, we actually are, because it's already included inside the XR grab interactable. Somewhere in there, something will be inheriting from mono behavior, which carries on down to us, which is our XR grab with pop-up. So if we go ahead now and save this, let's watch some magic happen, and we minimize it, you'll see our script compiles. And there you go, you can see now we have all the same functionality as we had before with our XR grab interactable script, but now we've inherited from it in our own script and carried across all the variables and methods. So this is now going to work in exactly the same way. Let me demonstrate that in VR. So there you go, I'm now actually able to pick this cube up again. So actually nothing has really changed, it's just that we now have our own script that's inheriting from the XR grab interactable, giving us access to all its methods and variables. So now let's have a look at how we can tap into the interactable events. Now we don't want to have to go to each and every object that we create and wire up scripts and stuff. We kind of want this to be automatic as much as possible to make our lives easier. So we want to find where these methods are being called in this XR grab interactable script that we're inheriting from and tap into those. So let's bring up Visual Studio again. So let's find where these methods are for these events. Now we can take a look at the XR grab interactable I can hold down the control key and you see I get a little hand, come over the XR grab interactable. I can go ahead and click on there. And these are all the variables and methods for the XR grab interactable. And you can see that the XR grab interactable inherits from the XR base interactable. So right now you can't see any of these methods for firing the events that we need. So let's go ahead and click on the XR base interactable and scroll down, and you can see here now we're starting to get the XR interactable events, such as the on hover entered and selecting interactors and all sorts that we need to hook into. Now we want to find the methods associated with triggering those events, and we know we want to activate the canvas when we grab the object. So that's going to be on select entered, which is just here. Now this method is protected, which is saying that it's only accessible from the containing class or classes derived from it, which is what our script is. We're deriving from this class. So we can actually override this method and add in some functionality of our own. So we want to hook into the onSelectEntered method. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. And because that method is marked as virtual, we can override it. So all we need to say is override, and then we can say onSelectEntered, which is just here. You can see it's popped up in the list, onSelectEntered. And now we are overriding this onSelectEntered method. And you'll see here it automatically creates this base.onSelectEntered. And what this is saying to the engine is that before we do our stuff, we want to do all of the code that's contained within the base class, or the class we're inheriting from. So it does all the stuff by default that it would normally do, and then it's going to do our stuff on top. So this is when we've grabbed, and we want to do exactly the same for when we've let go. So we can say override on select exit, and again we get the instruction to carry out the default behavior, and then we're going to add in our stuff, or when object released. I'm going to put these two at the top for a second, a little bit of shimmying around. For this instance, I'm just going to take away the start and update function just so we can structure this and you can see what's going on. So we've got our protected override void on select entered. So we've grabbed our object, does the default stuff, and then it's going to do our own custom stuff. And the same for when we've let go as well. That was pretty intense, so why don't we take a break and make the canvas that we need to go above our game object. So let's make the canvas that goes over the top of the grabbable object. So we're going to go right click in a hierarchy and just make a normal canvas, go UI, canvas, and then we'll call this grab object canvas. And then we're going to make it world space. And let's say it don't need to be massive. So we'll say like it's 30 centimeters by 15 because it's just like a label that goes across the top. And just to help us position this a little bit better, let's go ahead and set it at 0, 0. Still massive. Oh, the height is wrong. There we go, 0.15. So you should have something that looks a little bit like that. Let's center it on our square for a second. This is just going to help us get the scale because we know how big the box is in the scene. So we know the label can be a lot smaller than that. So let's just bring the canvas size in a bit, like so. Then we can pull it back out. And we'll go and we'll create a text object in here, text mesh pro, and we'll call this grab label. Make it the same size, so 0.3 by, I can't remember what height was. And just reduce the font size. Right, so we'll go ahead and center everything up. Cool, so that will be what the label will look like when what comes on when we grab the object. And we can go ahead and make a prefab out of this. So we can go drag that in our prefabs folder and then you can delete it from the scene. So now we're going to need to set up our grab object that we made a second ago and create some variables that we can drop in here and link it up to the game object we need to instantiate, which is going to be our grab object canvas. Let's go ahead and we'll go back into our script. Okay, so let's think about the variables that we need. So control, we're going to need to get our canvas, and no other script needs access to this, so we can make it private. So we can say serialized field, so it shows up in the inspector, and it's going to be a game object, and this is going to be our canvas pop-up. Right, so go ahead and save that, and then minimize, and then give it time to compile. And then you're going to see here we've got the canvas pop-up come right into the bottom of our script, along with all our other variables that are inherited. And let's go ahead and make this a little bit neater. I'm going to give it a header, and I'm going to call it pop-up functionality. And let's knock it down a little bit, just to give ourselves a bit more space. And let's say 10F. So that's just going to nudge it down a little bit from the other groups of variables. See here as it compiles, we'll get a little title. And we've moved it down a little bit just to separate it out. And then we can go ahead now and we can drag in our prefab, our grab object canvas. This is the one that's going to pop up over the top. Okay, back to our script. So there's another variable we're going to need, and this is going to be the string that we're going to display over our pop-up. Again, this can be serialized field. You don't need the private keyword there if you don't want it. And I'm going to put text for pop-up. Like so. So we now have these events for when our object is picked up and let go. So let's go ahead and make our pop-up appear when we grab it. So I'm going to make reference to another method in here, which we haven't created yet. We're going to call it create pop-up. And then to make this method, you can press Control full stop and hit enter on generate method. It's going to put it right below. So here it is. So what we're going to grab our object. It's going to call this method create pop-up, and then we're going to come here. So inside this method, let's make our pop-up. So we can say instantiate pop-up canvas. What did I call it? Canvas pop-up. And we're going to put it at the transform.position and quaternion identity. So, and we want to store this instantiated game object in a variable so we have access to it. So where we've got our pop-up functionality variables, let's go ahead and we'll just make a private. We don't even need to see this one in the inspector. So we'll leave out the serialized field. And we'll make sure it's a game object, and we'll call it instantiated pop-up. Naming conventions all over the place there. Let's make that small I. Go ahead and save. Then back down in our create pop-up, we can say instantiated pop-up equals, and then we can store this new canvas in this game object here. So now that we've created the pop-up, we also need to set the text for our text label. There's a couple of ways we can do that. We can write a class that sits on our prefab for our canvas that we access and that controls the text inside our text box. Or we can access the text via the get child and then get the component for the text mesh pro. So let's have a look at doing that. We can say instantiated pop-up dot transform dot get child, and it'll be the first one. And then we want to say get component, and it's going to be the text mesh pro UGUI, but we're going to need to use TM Pro at the top as a namespace. So we'll say using TM Pro, and then when back down here we can say text mesh pro UGUI dot text, and then we can say equals text for pop-up, like so. So we create our canvas, we assign the text, we're going to get the child inside that transform, which is going to be our text mesh pro, and we're going to set its text as the text for pop-up. Let's go ahead and just test that that's all working okay. So before we go ahead and test this out on our grab object, we need to set what the string is going to be. So here we can write green cube, and then we'll go ahead and press play. And inside VR we'll go ahead and grab. And there you go, see it's put in the green cube canvas there, and it's just going to remain because we haven't done anything else with it. And then every time we go ahead and pick this up and grab it, it's going to create another canvas. So we've got green cube popping up all over the place. So that's cool. So the next step is let's make that follow our object. So let's go back to our script. And now we want to allow the canvas to actually track with our object. And we're going to use the update loop for that in our script. So we can say, just start typing update and you get it back here. Now we're going to control this. We don't want this running all the time when our cube's just kind of sitting there. So what we'll do is we'll create a bool. Again, this is going to be a private bool, and it's going to be called can track object. That's going to be equal to false by default, like so. Let's tidy that up a little bit. And in our update, we want to say if can track object, and then we put the exclamation mark there to say we want to make sure it's false. So if we're not allowed to track the object, then we'll just simply return. If we are allowed to start tracking the object, then let's update the position. This method hasn't been created yet, so we'll go ahead and control full stop and generate the method just down below. So this is where the lesson gets slightly tricky, and we've got to do a little bit of maths to work out the position of our canvas. Because when we create the canvas, currently it's going to come in dead center of our cube, but each game object is going to be different size, so it's not like we can specify a size in the inspector. So what we need to do, because we know it's a grabbable object, that grabbable object is going to have a collider, and we can use that collider to determine how high up we have to move our canvas. What we'll do is when we move our canvas into place, we'll use the transform position X and the transform position Z, which will match our cube, but our Y position is going to have an offset, which is going to bump it up a little bit. There's going to be two parts to that offset. There's going to be the height of the actual object we've grabbed, and then we have to account for the height of our canvas and nudge that up a bit too. But the first priority is figuring out the size of the game object that we're currently grabbing, and we'll call that offset. So we're going to say var y offset, and that is going to be equal to our collider height. But we don't really want to be using get component every single frame. So what we're going to do is we're going to cache it. We're going to go up here, we're going to say private collider objects collider. Then we want to assign this collider, so we're going to use our start method. Go ahead and type start, and we can say objects collider equals get component collider, like so. And then when we run, that collider is already automatically going to get assigned. I'm going to turn this into an expression body by clicking on objects collider, control full stop, and then use expression body for methods. Let's go ahead and save that. So now we've got the objects collider, we can then work out its height. We can say objects collider dot bounds dot extents, and if I leave it there, we can see it says the extents of the bounding box. This is always half of the size of the bound, so it's going to go from the center to the top and work out what that value is. That's exactly kind of what we want, and we want it in the y-axis. And then for a minute, we're just going to leave it there. We're going to add a little bit more to this. If we just leave it like this, then what will happen is the offset will only push our canvas up to the top, which is good, but the transform point of our canvas is dead in the middle. So it'll look like our text is going through the top half of the box. So we also need to account for the height of our canvas. We can get hold of that value by going var rect height equals instantiated pop-up dot transform. We'll do a get component here just for a second. We always tidy it up in a bit. Rect transform, and then we want the size delta and its height. But just so you understand what's going on here, we're getting hold of our canvas and its rect transform and getting its height, because this is what we need to add on to our y offset. So we can still cache this value. I would have to do it once it's instantiated here to be stored, rather than our start method, because this object doesn't exist, the instantiated pop-up, up until the point when we grab it. So we can say private rect transform pop-up rect, and then where we create our pop-up, we can say pop-up rect is equal to instantiated pop-up dot get component rect transform, like so. And then we can tweak this little line of code just slightly by saying pop-up rect dot size delta y, which is a bit easier to read, and we're also not doing a get component every update. So now we're just going to improve on our y offset. So we've got the size of our game object, and then we're going to add on to that the rect height. We're going to need to divide that by 2, because we only want to take it from the center down rather than the entire height. And then that's what we need for the y offset. I'm going to create a new vector 3, which is going to be our offset position, a new vector 3. We're going to place this pop-up at the transform dot position dot x and the transform dot position dot y, but then we're going to add plus in our y offset, and then we'll put it at the same z position, so it's right in the middle. And then we can say that our instantiated pop-up, its position needs to be offset position, which is here. So let's jump in and see if this is all hooked up right. Okay, so let's have a test. We've got a hand, go grab. Okay, so it's created the text, the green cube, but it's not tracking our position. And let's have a look at our code. It's always good to do a little bit of debugging. These things never work out as they're meant to first time. So let's go through it line by line quickly. It's only a small script, so it shouldn't take too long. So we've grabbed our object, and then it fires this method, does all the normal stuff, and it creates the pop-up. So we know it's instantiating the pop-up, and it's setting the initial transform to the right place, and it's putting the text in the right location, it's getting the component. So that's all okay. And then in our update loop, you can see here. So we're saying if can track object. We haven't actually adjusted this value yet. So we know that once we've created our pop-up, we can track the object. We say can track object is going to be equal to true. So then once we've picked up our object, it will allow it to then go through to the update position and start moving with the cube. So let's just quickly test that out. There we go. So you can see here it's moving with the cube. It's adjusting its position now. It's not in the center, it's nudged it up. And you can see as we turn, all that's adjusted, and it's always in the right place, just like it is in Transference, which is really cool. But one thing it doesn't do at the moment is it doesn't look at the player. Whoa, keep killing the microphone. It doesn't look directly at the camera, which isn't, you don't need to have that in, but I think it's kind of cool if that rotates around and faces the player all the time. It's quite nice to see that working just like in Transference, and then we also have to deactivate it when you let go. So let's have a look at that rotation. We've updated the position. Now let's go ahead and update the rotation. I always like to keep lots of script outside of my update loop. Wouldn't like to put all this inside because it gets quite messy and hard to know what's going on. So I like to create methods inside the update loop and then just call those every frame. And also is put our update rotation method right below. Whereas in here it goes update position first. So I'm just going to move all this, Control X, delete a couple of lines, and then pop that back in here. There we go. So now we want to look at updating the rotation every frame. And what we're going to do here is we're going to get the camera position and minus that from the pop-up position. And we're going to use the Quaternion look rotation to force that canvas to look at the camera, but only on the y-axis. So let's do our var. Let's do var look position. That's going to be equal to our camera.main. This is just going to grab the main camera in the scene. And we're going to get that transform.position. And we're going to minus the instantiated pop-up.position. And then we can say that the look position on the y-axis is going to be equal to 0. We're going to create a local variable here called rotation. And that's going to be Quaternion use the look rotation, which is it creates a rotation with a specified forwards and upwards direction. That's what we want. We'll go ahead and hit look rotation, and we're going to pass that our look position. You can say instantiated pop-up.transform.rotation to rotation. Let's go ahead and jump into VR. Let's test that one out quickly. Mistake. Right, so for so that's cool. So now you can see it's tracking with the camera, and it's always facing us, which is really neat because it's flipped our canvas. So we could either sort that out in our script if we wanted to, or we could just simply tweak our canvas. So we can grab our prefab, let's drop it back in the scene. Where we've got our text element, let's just flip it around quick and dirty, and then just override and apply. And then now when we play, our text is facing the forward position inside our canvas, and now you can see it's facing us and will rotate towards us whichever way we turn the game object. Here's when we let go, and that's a really quick thing to do. We're just going to destroy that object. So we'll go up to our onSelect exited method. So this is when we let go. So we're going to destroy our pop-up. Let's get rid of our comment here. Don't need that anymore. Create a method. We'll just call it destroy pop-up. They can track object equals false. We don't want that update loop running it over and over. Destroy pop-up method. Oh, you really need this actually. You could just do that in onSelect exited. From here we can destroy instantiated pop-up. Just like that. And that's going to get rid of it when we let go. And you can make this into an expression body and enter just to neaten that up. So I'm going to zoom out quickly because it looks like an awful lot of scripts going on, but actually the reality of it is it's quite small and not an awful lot going on. You don't need all those system references at the top. In fact, you could move can track objects here into our destroy pop-up. That might be a better way of doing it and keep it consistent with the layout of the onSelect entered. But you know, that's just getting really picky. And I always urge you to go through your scripts after you've finished writing them just to see if you can improve them. So quite a short, simple little code that's just going to allow that text object to pop in and track our object and face our camera. Just like it does in Transference. And then when I let go, it's going to go away and grab it again, go away. There we go. So you could go down the route of always having a canvas in the scene, so you don't have to keep creating it and destroying it. But then you'd have to do some logic for if your left hand then picks up something else, you're going to need to have another canvas somewhere in the scene that gets instantiated, gets moved, turned on, moved, and then you'd need to kind of write some logic in there. So one canvas gets assigned to the left hand, one canvas gets assigned to the right hand, and I really didn't want to do that. So this script now is exactly the same as our XR grab interactable. It's doing all that kind of base functionality as it was before, except we've extended it to accommodate for a pop-up over the grab object, and that you can then assign text to that object. So just to show you how kind of easy this is to set up, I'm going to go ahead now and go 3D object and set a capsule, which is huge. Let's make it 20. So it's a 20 centimeter. What's going on? 20 centimeter capsule. Let's rotate it around like so. And put it in front of us. Blue. And then on these, you can go ahead now, and like before, you can go ahead and you can either add your XR grab interactable, in which case the same behavior will occur. You'll be able to pick it up, but this one doesn't allow for any label above your object. Or you can use our new and improved script, XR grab with pop-up, where we can now populate the canvas that we want to use. So we just grab a canvas, stick it in there, job done. And then we can say blue pill. We have to choose like Neo in the Matrix. These are suppositories. So as you can see, really quick to set up. Don't have to faff around with entering like offsets all down here. This is all kind of done for us. Then when we run this, size these tablets. We've got our red peel. It's going to change its height accordingly and just look as if it's kind of rotating around the game object, which is one of the features I really loved about Transference. Let's give you kind of an overview of what it was grabbed. Just a nice little touch. And the same with the blue pill, and you go ahead and pick them both up. You're going to have those two canvases there, and they're all going to track look at the camera. So that is how I would go about making that text effect from Transference.